welcome to the Esoteric Beat. This is episode 2. You know, all the time people ask me, what's the secret? And I'm happy to tell them. Beats me. So today I'm going to talk about what I'm reading. Here is a cool paper on the stages of transmutation, the visual rhetoric of alchemy and sequential art by Catherine H. Schaefer. I hope I've got that right, Schaefer. 2009. So this is a thesis for a master's degree in arts. And it's interesting to me. You know, I'm working on this this conference paper that got canceled because the conference got canceled because of all that's going on. And I'm working on this conference paper on the Hypnerotomachia polyphily and my favorite alchemical text, the Talentafugians, and the concept of space in these texts is important to me. One of the facets of this project is I'm going to be doing a paper for a friend's sort of weird architectural theory journal, and so I'm really interested in the concept of space. And so in this here thesis, some interesting stuff going on with theorizing what's happening in alchemical emblem books as examples of sequential art. And it's actually a comic book theory thesis, so there's a bunch of stuff about comic book theory that I thought would be good to get into, since it's going to help me to think about these alchemical picture books of the 17th century, which present, transmutation. And so our author here talks about how alchemy is basically change, right? If we think of alchemy as transmutation of metals or the human body or whatever. So if we're thinking about change, and what's going on with these pictures, the picture in a book isn't necessarily going to have time unless it's juxtaposed with another picture. There's some interesting stuff about how, like, the space of a picture implies time. Interesting theoretical grist for the mill here. I'm just giving a quick preview. I haven't finished the thesis or gotten my final thoughts, but I wanted to read for my audience this lovely, lovely paragraph that captures a lot of my thoughts on the whole historiographical problem of spiritual alchemy that you can read about in Lawrence Principe and William R. Newman. So here's the quote. Even the more pragmatic alchemical texts are commonly read allegorically, still seen as a code for the soul's transformation even once gods and phoenixes are literally not in the picture. There is a long-standing tradition of saving early alchemical writings from themselves by claiming that their true goal was the guidance of the self towards a state of perfection and not the production of silver or gold. The removal of the alchemical taint from the work of Sir Isaac Newton is only one of many examples. While in many cases this message of salvation may not be incorrect, something very important is lost when the physicality of metamorphosis is removed from the study of alchemical writing. The same way something is lost when allegory itself, if alchemical writing must be read allegorically, is treated only as a veil to be lifted and then cast aside. Now, this thesis goes on to get into some stuff about allegory and then esotericism that I kind of didn't really fully understand or agree with how it's being framed, because here's the thing, when we say esoteric alchemy is the spiritual stuff, what about the fact that the chemical significance of alchemy is also esoteric, right? It's also written in code, So when, for example, the green lion means when it's eating the sun, right? That means that an acid or a vitriol is dissolving some gold, right, represented by the sun. We already have an allegory that is to the physical substances. It's not like alchemy is allegorical when it's spiritual and not allegorical when it's, physical, material, chemical, however you want to put that. So when we go back to that historiographical problem from the paper in Larry and Bill's work, they weren't saying there's no such thing as spiritual alchemy. They're saying there's a problem in professional writing on alchemy and historical journals, and this problem is that people are accepting uncritically some stuff that comes we can trace it back to Carl Jung, but it isn't necessarily a criticism of Jung himself. This is a criticism of professional historians writing about alchemy. And, when they say, oh, alchemy is really just a spiritual pursuit, it's really just a meditation, it's really just an allegory for the stages of initiation of the soul, or the development of the soul, any of that kind of stuff, this is not an idea that you can really find in the alchemical tradition, right? Because these guys were working on how to create chemical changes, make stuff, do all of these chemical transformations. And, they had a theory of how to change lead into gold that sounds preposterous to us now because we have nuclear physics, but, at the time it wasn't really all that irrational of an idea, right? So we don't need to save alchemy from irrationality by saying, oh, well, it's this higher spiritual pursuit. And our author here in our comic book thesis says, it's like, pragmatic alchemy isn't cool, right? Intellectuals and the sort of like, and we're really drawing on Carl Jung's psychological approach. We're drawing on Stanton J. Linden's literary approach in here. These folks only find alchemy interesting if it's a spiritual allegory. They don't think it's interesting if it's a chemical allegory because, word on the street is the chemical pursuits of the alchemists never went anywhere. But you know what? In the history of science, we've figured out that alchemy actually was legit chemistry. And so, I love what our author is saying here. Something very important is lost when the physicality of metamorphosis is removed from the study of alchemical writing. Here that insight is being applied to say, look, if we're going to talk about, how alchemy picture books work as a sort of proto-comic book, as a series of sequential arts, trying to like be an educational tool or an artistic like delight and entertainment, representing this transmutation process, right? We need to think about space and time. We need to think about the physicality of the transformations, and even if we're interested in alchemy as a spiritual pursuit, and Larry and Bill, they say we're not saying there's no such thing as spiritual alchemy or that there was never any spiritual interpretations. It's just that there was a, what we'll call a legitimate, valid, rational, perfectly intelligent, and not delusional or superstitious or wrong-headed chemical tradition. And you're just going to lose something if, like these historians who uncritically accept the Jungian view that it's all just projection, it's all just the alchemists trying to work out their spiritual stuff by projecting it on the lab or whatever, you're going to miss a lot because it turns out that they can in fact reconstruct a lot of those chemical processes that the alchemists used. And going back to Zosimus, the guy who had the dream where he was being tortured and he realized he was the metal, right? Even that guy was very sensible lab technician, and from the small amount of text we have remaining of the guy, Larry Principe, for example, in his book The Secrets of Alchemy, points out, this guy is saying, hey, why does that substance turn white? It shouldn't turn white according to the theory, right? He's testing his theories empirically and very involved in getting his hands dirty and practical work. So I have a big problem with this division between exoteric alchemy, meaning physical, and esoteric alchemy, meaning spiritual. We need to problematize that if we're going to talk about how alchemy functioned as if we're talking about the esoteric rhetoric, that's applied to both the physical and the spiritual, as I went over. And, if we're going to try and figure out whatever spirituality is behind alchemy at any given point, it's really problematic to say, well, there's this one like metaphysical alchemy. It's what alchemy really means, and alchemy is never about getting your hands dirty with the physical. It's always about the practice of spiritual evolution. Like that's just, there's no way to get access to this metaphysical reality of what alchemy really is. If we're historians, and if we look at spiritual alchemies, we find in every different spiritual context, we find a different spiritual alchemy. We find different interpretations of alchemy that take the physical, chemical, stuff and use it as a metaphor for, in ancient Taoist alchemy, the processes within the body, or there's Sufi allegories of alchemy like Al-Ghazali's Alchemy of Happiness, or Kudra, who is it Kudra? I might not have the name right here. says like these different stages of dying processes, or like the different stages of spiritual transmutation. Like, we do have that. We do have people who take the physical, chemical stuff and turn it into a spiritual allegory, but you need the chemical stuff to understand how that works. Thanks for coming to the podcast. I hope you like and subscribe, and stay curious.